My mother texted, "This Christmas is just for your sister's family." I typed back 2 words. "That's fine." Then I booked a first-class ticket for my grandmother to Aspen. Did they think I would cry? No. I rented an entire chalet on the mountainside and ordered a table long enough for everyone who had ever been left behind. My name is Abigail Parker. I am 32 years old, and I am an architect and contractor. I run my own firm, Northline Atelier, out of Denver, and I spend my life turning abstract concepts into physical structures, spaces that people can live and breathe in. For the past 3 years, my entire focus has been on the Halo Ridge project. It is an experimental chalet, a structure of reclaimed cedar, thermally broken steel, and triple-paned glass, clinging to a mountainside in Aspen. It was my showcase, the thing I was pouring my entire reputation into. I was on site, in the vast, cold, great room, checking the radiant floor heating schematics on my laptop when my phone buzzed on a stack of plywood. It was the Parker family group chat. The screen lit up, a small, toxic rectangle of light in the high-altitude twilight. My mother, Judy, had sent a message. "Hi kids, just confirming Christmas plans. Dad and I are so excited to have a quiet, private Christmas in Ohio this year. Just with Savannah, Mark, and the new baby. Can't wait to spoil our first grandchild. We'll see you in the new year. Abigail." I read the words, then I read them again. A quiet, private Christmas. Just with Savannah. The "see you in the new year" was the final twist of the knife, a polite, public dismissal. I was not simply uninvited. My absence was a required component of their perfect, private holiday. The silence in the chalet, which had felt peaceful seconds before, now felt suffocating, broken only by the muffled thump of a distant snow cannon on the slopes. This wasn't a surprise. It was an escalation. Last year, my 31st birthday was merged with a welcome home from your honeymoon brunch for my younger sister, Savannah. It was held at some beige country club in Ohio. The air thick with the smell of powdered eggs and sycophantic praise for the new couple. My parents, Rick and Judy, presided over the gift-giving. Savannah, the gentle star of the family, received a set of classic pearl earrings and a matching necklace. My gift, handed to me as people were checking their watches, was a cheap, plastic-covered notebook from a drugstore checkout line. It had a cartoon kitten on the cover. "For your sketches, honey," my father had said, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. I was the independent one. That was the brand they had assigned me, the label that justified the neglect. It started when I was 10, the day I taught myself to use a jigsaw in the back shed because I wanted a bookshelf and Dad was busy watching a golf tournament. I built the shelf. It was crooked, but it was strong. I was so proud. When I brought it inside, my mother didn't look at the joints. She looked at the grease stain on my t-shirt. "Abigail, don't drag that dirty thing onto the good carpet," she'd said. "And be careful. Your sister's dance recital is this weekend. I can't be taking you to the emergency room for splinters." My father's favorite phrase, delivered while I was soldering a broken circuit board for the family toaster, was, "Don't stain the kitchen counter with your parts." I learned to make my needs invisible. I learned to clean up every speck of sawdust. I learned that my accomplishments were messy. While Savannah's were celebrated, my solitude became my skill set. My loneliness became my blueprint. I didn't just build bookshelves. I built the walls I lived inside. When it came time for college, I applied for scholarships. I won a full ride for engineering. When Savannah decided she wanted an art history degree, they remortgaged the house to pay for her tuition and a laptop upgrade. When I asked for help with my advanced calculus textbooks, just help. Not the full amount. My mother's voice was tight. "You're the independent one, Abigail. You always figure it out." My thumb hovered over the glowing screen of the group chat. I could have unleashed a decade of meticulously stored data. The missed science fairs, the graduations they'd skipped, the fact that I had single-handedly managed my grandmother's knee surgery logistics while they took Savannah to Napa. Instead, I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood. I typed 2 words. Okay. I hit send. The blue bubble appeared. An instant liked reaction from Savannah popped up beneath it. A tiny, passive-aggressive stamp of approval. I did not cry. I did not throw my phone against the unpainted drywall. I closed the group chat. I closed my heating schematics, and I opened the master budget spreadsheet for the Halo Ridge project. The numbers were solid. The margins were clean. The house was 99% complete. My eyes landed on a specific line item. Marketing, PR, staging. It was fully funded. I clicked the cell. My phone rang again. This time, it was a real call. A Denver area code. I answered. My voice rough. Parker? Abigail Parker. This is Ben Russo, from the Homestyle Channel. I stood up. The Homestyle Channel was the kingmaker. Yes, Ben. Hi, Abigail. Listen, I am standing at the locked gate of your Halo Ridge project. My producer got the address from the county permits office. Hope that's okay, and I have to tell you, this place is a fortress. A beautiful, spectacular fortress. The network loved the drone footage we pitched. They want to feature it. We have a last-minute gap in our holiday primetime lineup. We're talking a full 60-minute special. We're calling it Chalet Reborn. We want to film the final staging. We want to film you, the architect, hosting your first-ever holiday event in this space. A perfect, aspirational Rocky Mountain Christmas. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling glass. The sun was gone, leaving the Elk Mountains as a sharp, violet silhouette against a darkening sky. A stage, a film crew, a holiday special, set to air in the dead week between Christmas and New Year's. Ben, I said, my voice suddenly very clear. I can do that, but I have one condition. Anything. We'll black out the proprietary geothermal tech, whatever you need. The story is the chalet, it's the architecture, it's the space. But my family, they're extremely private. I'll do the show. But their names, their location in Ohio, anything linking this back to them, must be kept anonymous. The focus has to be on the house and the gathering. There was a pause. Done, he said, relief in his voice. We're professionals. Abigail, we're here to film architecture, not your family drama. We can have a crew there in 3 days. We hung up. I stood in the vast, empty great room. The fireplace was a monolith of cold, dark slate. Not your family drama. But what if the architecture was the drama? This was the pivot. I wouldn't engage in a noisy, messy public fight. I wouldn't air their names. I wouldn't expose them. I would simply use the space I had built to tell the truth. I would create an event that, by its very existence, illuminated the world I had built in their absence. A world founded on inclusion, not private exclusions. I picked up my phone. I opened my airline app. 1 first-class ticket, one way. Denver to Aspen. Passenger name, May Whitmore, Grandma May, 78 years old. My mother's mother. She had arthritic knees from a lifetime of waitressing at a truck stop, but a memory sharp enough to cut glass. She was the one who had seen me in that shed all those years ago. She was the one who, after my mother had banished my crooked stool, came out later that night with a cup of hot chocolate, sat squarely on my creation, and pronounced it the most solid chair in the whole damned house. She was the one they always forgot to pick up for Sunday dinners until it was too late. The one they stuck in the guest room with the broken heat. I opened a new document on my laptop, not a spreadsheet, a guest list. I added Mrs. Alder, the elderly woman I'd met at the local Aspen hardware store. She'd told me she was spending Christmas alone because her son-in-law had respectfully suggested her presence complicated the dynamic for his own parents. I added my cousin Eli, who had been publicly disinvited from the Parker Thanksgiving after he lost his job. I added the 2 teenagers from the neighboring ranch, whose parents were essential services pilots and worked every holiday, leaving them with a rotating sitter. The list grew. It was a collection of the forgotten, a list of everyone who, like me, had been relegated to the kids' table long after they were adults, everyone who had been told they were too much or not enough to warrant a proper invitation at the main event. I walked over to the large whiteboard where I kept my structural notes and punch lists. I erased the load-bearing calculations and the HVAC final pass notes. I took a thick black marker and wrote in sharp, architectural script, "No hierarchy seating, one table only, a direct view of the Elk Mountains." I looked at the words. I looked at the empty room. A blank canvas waiting to be filled. I didn't need to ask for a seat at their table. I would build my own. The chalet was not a house. It was a response. It was my answer to years of flimsy, poorly designed structures, both physical and emotional. The great room was defined by a 2-story wall of low-E glass, a passive solar system that drank in the high-altitude sun all day and held its warmth long after the mountains turned purple. The trusses overhead were not new pine. They were massive, reclaimed cedar beams from a century-old trestle bridge, their surfaces scarred with history. The fireplace was a 20-foot column of locally quarried slate, cool and dominant to the touch, grounding the entire structure. A floating steel staircase led to a cantilevered hallway, a hallway of perspectives I'd designed, that looked down over the main living space on one side and out over the vast white valley on the other. This was Halo Ridge. It was solid, it was transparent, and it was entirely mine. My first act of protest was not a phone call. It was an act of creation. In the center of the great room, I laid out my tools. The staging company had offered a catalog of bland, expensive rental furniture. I'd refused. The centerpiece of this gathering, the literal and metaphorical new table, had to come from my own hands. I had salvaged a stack of 100-year-old white oak planks from a barn demolition in the next county. They were thick, heavy, and impregnated with the memory of a century of use. For 2 full days, I worked, I planed, I joined, and I sanded, but not too much. I left the small, dark circles of old nail holes. I left the long, hairline crack where the wood had split and stabilized. I left the subtle, undulating grain worn down by time. These were not imperfections. They were a testament to survival. I called them beautiful scars. When I was finished, I sealed the surface with multiple coats of tung oil, rubbed in by hand, leaving a low-gloss, tactile finish that felt warm, almost alive. Under the palm. The table was 16 feet long, 4 feet wide, and it stood on simple, custom-welded steel legs. It was immovable, honest, and it could seat 18 people without a single person feeling cramped. Next, the seating chart. I drew it on a piece of vellum with my drafting pencils. The table's shape itself was a statement, a pure rectangle. There was no head, no foot, just 2 long, equal sides. I placed Grandma May in the exact center, opposite the slate fireplace. To her left, I placed the 14-year-old ranch kid, Leo. To her right, his 12-year-old sister, Maya. They weren't an afterthought. They were a priority. I'd made sure I had a new, complicated Lego architecture set for Leo and a professional set of drawing charcoals for Maya. Their holiday abandonment was not going to be a tragedy this year. It was going to be an induction into a different kind of family. The other names, Mrs. Alder, Cousin Eli, my old college roommate who was recently divorced. The couple from town who'd lost their lease filled the remaining seats, each one placed with intention, a constellation of the displaced. The invitations were next. I bought a ream of heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind with a deckled edge. I wrote each one by hand, not in calligraphy, but in my clear, precise architectural script. The words were simple. You are invited to a Christmas Eve dinner at Halo Ridge, 7 o'clock. Come as you are. No one sits on the edge. I couldn't do this alone, nor did I want to. The act of not asking for help had been my old life. My new life was about delegation to the right people. I called Cade, a local Aspen chef I'd met at the farmer's market. He ran a small, struggling catering company built on farm-to-table principles. Cade, I said, I have a budget, and I have a request. Mountain comfort. I want food that feels like a hug. No foams, no gels, no tiny portions. He laughed. I can do that. I'm thinking a slow-roasted herb chicken with garlic and rosemary, a rich white bean and winter kale soup, the kind my grandmother made, bread, but make it special sourdough with a brown butter and sage spread, and for dessert, a dark chocolate tart. For the kids and the grandmas, I'll make a huge pot of cinnamon stick and vanilla bean cocoa. It's perfect, I said. One more thing. My grandmother loves white bean soup. Can you make sure that's on the menu cards? Grandma's recipe? Yours or mine? He asked. Does it matter? I replied. It's all of ours. I found a young duo, a violinist and a classical guitarist, playing in a heated plaza downtown. I hired them on the spot, asking them to prepare a set of Appalachian folk carols and simple, instrumental melodies, no booming sound system, just the analog warmth of horsehair on steel. The home-style crew arrived exactly 3 days later. They were a flurry of black parkas, rolling aluminum cases, and loud, friendly voices. Ben Russo, the producer, found me by the fireplace, where I was testing the flue. Abigail. The place is, wow, the cameras are going to love this. He unzipped his jacket, already planning his shots. Okay, so we'll start with an interview with you, right here. We'll get you talking about the family traditions that inspired this. Ben, I cut in, my voice quiet but firm. He stopped. No interviews. Not about family, not about traditions. You're here to film the space, the light, the materials. I agreed to let you film the staging, and you can get shots of my hands setting the table. You can get shots of the food. You can film the atmosphere. But this is not a reality show. It's a dinner. My one condition, if you recall, was discretion. You can film from the deck, through the glass. You can get wide shots of the room, but no constructed drama. No close-ups on my guests' faces. He looked, for a second, like I'd stolen his favorite toy. Then he looked around the room, at the light hitting the oak table, at the view of the valley. He nodded, the professional in him winning. Hands and atmosphere. Got it. Okay. Guys, he yelled to his crew, we're going art house with this one. Focus on the details. I want to smell the cedar through the lens. As the crew set up their tripod sliders and remote-controlled cameras on the exterior deck, a small utility vehicle pulled up the drive. Mrs. Alder, my neighbor from the hardware store, got out, carrying a large, foil-wrapped pie tin. She was a tiny woman, swallowed by a giant purple parka. Abigail, dear, she puffed, her glasses fogging up. I know I'm not on the hook for anything, but I made my apple pie. It's the only thing I'm any good at. I hope it's not an intrusion. Mrs. Alder, it is the opposite of an intrusion. I took the pie, which was still warm. Please, come in. She stepped into the great room, her eyes going wide. She looked at the crew outside, then at the massive table. Oh, my goodness. Is this for television? Sort of, I said. But mostly, it's just for us. She touched the edge of the oak table, her gloved finger tracing one of the beautiful scars. You know, she said, her voice dropping, for 23 years, I went to my son's house for Christmas, and for 23 years, my daughter-in-law's mother sat at the head of the table. My son's wife would always pull me aside in the kitchen and say, Helen, you don't mind, do you? It's just easier. I always sat at the side, next to the swinging door to the kitchen, got a draft on my neck every time. She looked at me, her eyes sharp. Last year, they just stopped asking. It's good to have a table like this, a table with no draft. That evening, I called Grandma May. She was in Denver, staying with a distant cousin, waiting for me to give the signal. Grandma, it's Abigail. I'm sending the car for you tomorrow morning. The ticket's all set. There was a crackle on the line, then her voice, thin but clear. Abby, I got the email with the flight. First class. It's just a bigger seat. Grandma, don't you just a bigger seat me, girl. I've been flying coach since 1962. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick, wobbling. Abigail, this, this invitation, it's the first time in, oh, I'd say 10 years, that someone has invited me to Christmas. Your mother, she expects me. She tells me what time to be ready. She never asks. I'm asking, Grandma, I really want you here. I'll be there, she said, her voice suddenly fierce. I'll be there if I have to crawl. You built a house, Abby. I want to see it. I hung up, the weight of her words settling on me. I'm asking. As the crew packed up for the night, I did the final staging. I unrolled a simple, undyed linen runner down the center of the table. I laid out the hand-thrown ceramic plates Cade was bringing, and then I strung the lights. I didn't hang them from the high ceiling. I strung thousands of tiny, warm white fairy lights low, just above head height, along the perimeter of the room. They were dense, like a cloud of captured fireflies. I'd calculated the effect. When the snow fell outside the glass, as it was forecasted to do, the low, warm light would reflect off the flakes, turning the entire room into a microcosm of a galaxy, a universe of stars. I had one last thing to do. I went to the storage room and retrieved a single, simple, shaker-style chair I'd built as a prototype. It was perfect in its simplicity. I brought it into the great room. I didn't place it at the table. I placed it near the entryway, beside the fireplace, angled toward the gathering. It was a space of acknowledgement. From a piece of leftover oak, I'd carved a small, simple plaque. I hung it on the back of the chair. It didn't say reserved. It said, for the one who was never invited. To understand the map of the Parker family, you do not look at a family tree. You look at a floor plan. You study the flow of traffic, the allocation of resources, and the locations of the load-bearing walls. My parents, Rick and Judy Parker, were the chief architects of this structure. Their life's work was not their profession. My father was a mid-level bank manager. My mother organized church fundraisers, but the maintenance of their social image in their small Ohio town, they were pillars of the community, which is to say, they were rigid, unmoving, and primarily concerned with appearances. Their religion was reputation. Their God was consensus. In this religion, my younger sister, Savannah, was the high priestess. She was the gentle star. This was the official, family-approved term for her. She was pretty in a way that required no effort, and compliant in a way that demanded no introspection from others. Her accomplishments were clean, simple, and photogenic head cheerleader, prom queen, a degree in art history, and a swift, appropriate marriage to a young man with a good dental plan. Every holiday, every dinner, every family decision was built around her. She was the central atrium. The rest of us were just hallways to get to her. My accomplishments were messy. They involved grease, sawdust, and voltage. I remember, clear as the high-altitude air, the day I won the district science fair. I was 14. My project was a functioning, scale-model hydroelectric generator I had built in the shed out of a cut-up garden hose, magnets ripped from old speakers, and a small turbine I'd hand-carved from a block of resin. It worked. It lit a string of 3 small, blue LED bulbs. It was loud. It smelled vaguely of ozone, and it had spattered muddy water all over my presentation board. When the judges announced my name for first place, I felt a jolt. I looked at the retired engineers who were shaking my hand, their eyes bright with genuine curiosity. They asked me about the coil windings. They asked me about the flow rate. I drove home with the oversized blue ribbon, the small cash prize, and the heavy, dripping generator on the passenger seat. I walked into the kitchen. The house was quiet, but charged with the scent of my mother's Chanel perfume. She and my father were in the hallway, dressed for a church committee dinner. Mom, Dad, I won. I took first place in the district. My mother turned, one hand adjusting my father's tie. Oh, that's wonderful, honey. That's just great. She looked past me at the generator I was holding. A small drip of water hit her clean linoleum floor. Her smile tightened. Well, don't leave that thing where people will trip over it And please, wash your hands. You have grease under your nails. My father patted my shoulder, his mind already at the dinner. That's my independent girl. See, you always figure it out. 2 weeks later, Savannah's cheerleading squad won a regional qualifier. Our house exploded. A professionally printed banner, "Congratulations, Savannah and the P-Town Panthers," was strung between the porch columns. There were 24 pink and white balloons tied to the mailbox. My mother spent an entire weekend baking 3 different kinds of themed cupcakes for the victory party. The cost of the banner and balloons alone was 4 times the prize money I had won. This was the blueprint. My win was a private, messy thing. Her win was a public, communal celebration. My parents' most effective tool was a simple line of reasoning. You're the strong one, Abigail. You don't need all this fuss. It was a brilliant piece of emotional architecture. It wasn't a denial of my needs. It was a compliment that disguised the denial. It reframed their neglect as a form of respect for my strength. I was independent. I was low maintenance. I didn't need the banners, the balloons, the attention, the chair at the table. Savannah, by contrast, was sensitive. She needed the support. She needed the encouragement. The logic was a lie, a sophisticated justification for their laziness. It was easier to fund Savannah's prom dress than to understand my request for a new soldering iron. It was easier to applaud her cheer routine than to sit through my 5-minute explanation of how a differential gear works. The most cutting phrase, the one that became the soundtrack to my adolescence, was always some variation of my mother's. Abigail, don't get the kitchen counter dirty with your screws. Or, don't leave your blueprints on the dining room table. We're having guests. Or, don't bring your dusty projects in the house. My work was dirty. My process was an inconvenience. My needs were an intrusion on the clean, orderly surface of their lives. So I learned to be silent. I learned to work in the cold. I moved my projects from the kitchen counter to the dining table to, finally, the back shed, and then the garage. I stopped asking for praise and started seeking results. I stopped showing them my projects and started turning my projects into a fortress. My loneliness became my workspace. My need for love was converted, like the water in my generator, into a different kind of power. It was channeled into competence. When it came time for college, I knew better than to ask. I got a job at a local garage, sweeping floors and, eventually, doing oil changes. I saved every penny. I applied for every scholarship. I wrote my essays at 3 a.m, my hands smelling of motor oil and cheap paper mill ink. I won a full ride to study architecture and structural engineering. I was in my dorm room my sophomore year, living on ramen and instant coffee. When I called home, Savannah answered, her voice bubbly. "Oh, Abby, guess what Daddy just sent me the money for a brand new Apple laptop, the silver one. It's for my art history classes. Mine was getting so slow." I was looking at my own laptop, a 7-pound black plastic brick I had bought refurbished with money from my summer construction job. The F key was missing. That was the moment. The cold, quiet, final click of a lock seating into place. The philosophy that had been a seedling in my mind now crystallized into a permanent, load-bearing beam. Do not ask. Build. If you ask, you give them the power to say no, the power to diminish you, the power to make you wait for a yes that will never come. But if you build, if you lay the foundation, run the electrical, and sign the permits yourself, you own the structure. There was one person who understood the structure, Grandma May. While my parents were worried about the kitchen counter, Grandma May had come out to the garage. It was a freezing November day. I was 13, trying to build a wooden stool, and I was failing. The wood was splitting. My hands were raw. She stood there in her thin coat, watching me. I expected the usual, "Don't you want to come inside and help me bake?" Instead, she pointed at my cheap, plastic handsaw. "That's your problem," she said, her voice raspy. "You're trying to build a house with a butter knife. Come with me." She took me to her cluttered, freezing garage, a place that smelled of old fertilizer and motor oil. From a rusted metal cabinet, She pulled a heavy, ominous-looking tool, a power planer. "This was your grandfather's," she said. "It'll take your hand off if you're stupid. You're not stupid. Plug it in. Let the tool do the work." She gave me space. She gave me tools. She respected the dirt. She was the only one who ever saw my messy process as a sign of progress. Not a problem to be cleaned up. The fissures in our family were deep long before this year. The precedent for my exclusion was set last winter. My phone had buzzed with a text from my mother. Not an invitation, a request. "Abigail, honey, I know you're so busy, but Savannah is just completely overwhelmed with the new baby and the new house. It would be such a help, your Christmas present to her. If you could drive down to Ohio on Saturday and help Mark install those heavy bookshelves in the nursery. You're just so good at that sort of thing. It would mean the world to your sister." I was not invited for Christmas. I was requisitioned for manual labor in place of Christmas. I was the contractor, not the family. I had texted back, "I can't. My project deadline in Denver was moved up." The scene receipt appeared. No reply. That was the first major crack. And this year's text, the quiet, private Christmas text, was not a new wound. It was simply the final decisive swing of the sledgehammer. It was the first time they had stopped pretending. The first time they had admitted, in their polite, church social way, that the structure they were building their perfect, new grandchild. Private family no longer required my presence. The fracture had become a foundation, and on it, I would build my own. The day before Christmas Eve, the chalet was a machine of quiet, focused activity. The house was not just being decorated, it was being calibrated. Every detail was a response, a correction to a lifetime of careless oversights. My work began in the guest wing. Halo Ridge had 4 guest suites, each one designed with clean lines, heated stone floors, and a private terrace facing the valley. I had assigned them specifically. For Mrs. Alder, who had been relegated to the drafty kitchen door, I chose the Sunstone Room, the warmest in the house, with southern exposure and a deep, velvet armchair. For Cousin Eli, who had been shamed for losing his job, I put him in the study suite, the one with the large, oak desk, high-speed internet, and a view of the immovable, permanent mountains. I wanted him to feel the dignity of work, even in rest, but the rooms themselves were only the hardware. The software was in the details. On each bed, beside the stack of thick, linen-scented towels, I placed a small, handwritten note for Mrs. Alder. The note read, "We saved the warmest spot for you, for Eli. A space to think. We're glad you're here. For the ranch kids, Leo and Maya, who were sharing the bunk room. The loft is stocked. No assigned bedtime." These were not grand gestures. They were small acknowledgments. They were the opposite of the label I had been given. They were not, "You're strong. You don't need this." They were, "We see you. We made this for you." I moved back to the great room as the sun began to dip, triggering the first layer of my lighting plan. My work is about light, how it moves, how it feels, how it defines a space. This room was designed for a 3-layer system. The first layer was ambient warm, deeply recessed LEDs set to 30%, just enough to make the cedar trusses glow. The second was the task lighting, which I wouldn't use. The third, and most important, was the soul. I walked the length of the 16-foot oak table, placing 24 thick, pure beeswax candles in simple, low-profile slate holders. The scent of honey and warm wax filled the air. I lit the first one. The flame was steady, a clear, warm orange. It reflected in the massive 2-story wall of low-E glass. But the glass did not just reflect the flame, it reflected the entire mountain range behind it, creating a ghost image, the candle floating in the deep purple of the twilight snow. That was the effect I wanted the inside and the outside, warmth and cold, connected by a single point of light, on the table, at each of the 18 place settings. I laid the menu. Kate and I had finalized it that morning. I had insisted on writing them out myself. on the same heavy cardstock as the invitations. My architectural script was precise. It listed Cade's menu: slow-roasted herb chicken, brown butter sage sourdough, dark chocolate tart. But at the top, I wrote the header, "A Halo Ridge Christmas Eve." And at the bottom, I added the 2-line mission statement: "There is no kids' table, there is no edge seating." Cade arrived as I was finishing, his van puffing steam in the cold. He was carrying a crate of fresh herbs and a massive, insulated stock pot. He looked at the menu I had left for him at his prep station. "I love this," he said, tapping the card. My cousins always made me sit at the folding card table in the hallway, always smelled like mothballs. He pulled out his own set of menu cards, slightly different from mine. "I made an addition. I hope it's okay." He showed me. He had taken the white bean and winter kale soup and printed a small, elegant subline beneath it: "Grandma May's recipe." "But it's your recipe, Cade," I said. "Is it?" He shrugged, smiling. "It's a grandma's recipe. That's all that matters. It belongs to her now." From the loft, a sound drifted down, thin and sharp. It was the violinist. She was alone, tuning her instrument. She began to practice. Not a formal carol, but a snatch of an old Appalachian folk tune. It was the kind of music Grandma May's parents might have known: a high, lonely, yearning sound that spoke of cold winters and rough-hewn cabins. It was a thread of memory, a piece of our rural, Ohio-shed past, pulled taut and strummed aloud here, in this palace of steel and glass in Aspen. The sound was a bridge. Outside, the homestyle crew was making the most of the magic hour. They were forbidden from filming faces, so they filmed the house. Ben had authorized a flycam, a high-end drone that was now humming 200 feet above the chalet. I watched it on Ben's monitor. It was a stunning cinematic shot, a slow God's-eye view pan over the snow-covered roof, the geometric lines of the house standing in sharp contrast to the wild, organic drifts of the mountain. The chimney puffed a perfect, picturesque plume of wood smoke into the freezing air. "This is our hero shot," Ben murmured, his eyes glued to the screen. "Aspirational, but isolated. A beacon. Chalet Reborn is going to kill in the ratings." My phone buzzed in my pocket. A news alert from a design blog I followed. The Homestyle Channel's PR team had just released the press blast. Homestyle Channel's Chalet Reborn brings A-list architecture to your holiday season. The article was live. The mechanism was in motion. Another buzz. This time, a text. It was from my best friend, Ray, a trauma nurse in Denver. She knew my family. She knew the entire, exhausting history. The text read, "Abby, I just saw the article. The house looks incredible, but are you sure you're okay? This whole thing feels loaded. Please tell me this isn't some elaborate revenge plot that's going to blow up in your face." I stood by the window, watching the drone, a tiny, insect-like machine, against the massive, indifferent face of the mountain. I thought about the word revenge. Revenge is hot. It's loud. It's about tearing something down. This was not that. This was cold. This was quiet. This was about building something better. I texted her back. "It's not revenge, Ray. It's just sending the right invitations." My last stop was the chair I had designated for Grandma May, the center seat. I had driven into town and bought the thickest, softest, undyed wool robe I could find. I draped it over the back of her chair. It was a simple, tactile thing. Then, I took a box of chemical hand warmers, the kind skiers use, and tucked 2 packages deep into the robe's pockets. Her circulation was bad. This was not a performance of care. It was the application of care. This was the detail. My mother would have given her a pretty, useless lap blanket. I was giving her functional warmth. I stepped back, surveying the room, the table, the lights, the chair. It was almost complete. I walked to the main hallway, the one connecting the great room to the entryway. The walls were bare, waiting for final art. I hung only one piece. It was a framed 8 by 10 photograph. It was not a professional photo. It was an old, faded Polaroid from 20 years ago. It was a picture of me, aged about 10, with sawdust in my hair and a smear of grease on my cheek, grinning wildly. I was sitting on my first project, a crooked, misshapen, ridiculously overbuilt stool made of scrap 2x4s, the stool I had built in the shed. The one Grandma May had pronounced solid. It was my diploma. It was my proof of origin. It was the physical evidence that I had been building my own chair all along. Finally, I went to the mudroom. I put on my heavy boots and my parka. I grabbed the industrial-sized, 50-pound bag of ice melt. I walked outside into the biting, absolute cold. The home-style crew was gone. The world was silent. I walked the entire length of the stone pathway, from the driveway to the front door, scattering the gray pellets with my gloved hand. The sound was a sharp hiss as the salt hit the thin layer of ice. I was not creating a winter wonderland. I was mitigating risk. Mrs. Alder had a walker. Grandma May had a bad knee. Cousin Eli had thin-soled dress shoes. This was the last, most important detail. It was the unglamorous, invisible work. It was care, not performance. And it was the one thing my family had never, not once, managed to do. At 7 o'clock, the chalet was no longer a project. It was alive. The lights were at their calibrated 3-layer deep warmth. The scent of Cade's herb chicken and the beeswax candles had merged, and the first, fat, anticipatory flakes of snow had begun to drift past the great glass wall. The stage was set. Then, the sound of tires on the freshly gridded drive. Headlights cut a swath through the dark. The car service. I met them at the door. Grandma May emerged from the back of the black SUV. The first-class flight and the private car had insulated her, but the second she stood, the Aspen air hit her. It was 0 degrees, thin and sharp. She pulled her old cloth coat tighter and took a deep breath, a small plume of white fog escaping her lips. "Well," she said, her voice a dry rasp, "it certainly smells expensive. Welcome to the mountain. Grandma?" The driver, a young man, was trying to figure out how to get her up the stone path with her walker. I stopped him. "I've got this." I gestured to the utility sled I'd rented, a sleek, low-profile cargo sled with a guide handle. "Aspen limousine." She looked at the sled, then at me. A slow smile spread across her face. "You're kidding me." "It's either this or I carry you," I said, offering a hand. "Oh, the sled's just fine. You smart aleck." She settled onto it, and I pulled her, gently, over the path I had salted. She was light, a small, bundled figure, looking up at the sky. She was laughing, a quiet, rusty sound. By the time we reached the massive, reclaimed cedar door, I helped her inside, helped her off with her coat. She stood in the entryway, her walker clicking on the heated stone, and she just stopped. She looked into the great room. Her eyes went from the high, dark trusses to the column of slate, and then to the wall of glass, where the snow was now falling like a shaken globe. "Oh, Abby," she whispered. It was the only time I'd ever heard her voice completely unguarded. She shuffled forward, past the empty chair, her eyes not even registering it yet. Her focus was on the center of the room, the table. She let go of her walker and braced herself on the back of a chair. She ran one hand, thin-skinned and knotted with age, over the surface. Her fingers traced the grain, dipping into one of the beautiful scars I had left. She didn't need to ask if I'd bought it. She knew my work. "You built this, didn't you?" "Abby." "I did. Grandma." Her hand was shaking, just slightly, from the cold or the emotion, but her eyes, when they met mine, were as bright and sharp as a new saw blade. "It's solid," she said. It was the highest compliment she knew. "It's the most solid thing in this whole crazy house." More cars. The guests arrived in a soft flurry. Cousin Eli, looking thin and pale in a suit that was one size too large, his lost my job shame clinging to him like a second coat. I didn't offer pity. I offered him the warmest, heaviest mug of Cade's spice cider. He gripped it with 2 hands, as if it were a life raft. Mrs. Alder came in, not alone, but with Aunt Marjorie, the one my mother's side of the family had erased after her divorce. They had apparently met in the shared shuttle I'd arranged. Mrs. Alder was pointing out the quality of the door hinges, and Aunt Marjorie was laughing. A real, full-throated laugh I hadn't heard in a decade. Then, the kids, Leo and Maya, they came in, shoulders hunched, expecting a corner with a bad television. "Wow," Leo said, looking at the ceiling. Maya, the quiet artist, just stared at the wall of glass. "Guys," I said. "Glad you made it." I pointed to a low table by the fireplace, where I'd left a complex, 2,000-piece Lego architecture set of a ski jump. Leo's eyes went wide. "Is that? No way. That's the new modular stadium set." "Close," I said. "It's the chalet. Go for it." He didn't need to be told twice. He and Maya were on the floor, ripping open the box, their holiday orphan status forgotten, replaced by the immediate, serious work of construction. Ben Russo, the producer, found me. His eyes were darting, taking in the scene. The forgotten guests, the old woman, the kids on the floor. "Abigail, this is perfect," he whispered, his voice urgent. "This is the aspirational we wanted. I just need a little something. Can I get a soundbite from the grandma? Just 2 words." "No, Ben," I said, my voice low and final. "You can't, but you can get your hand shots. Now." I walked to the table. I picked up a beeswax candle and tilted it, letting a small drop of wax fall to re-anchor it in its slate holder. I adjusted a single linen napkin, turning it so the fold was perfectly aligned with the table's edge. I was not performing. I was correcting an imbalance. The home-style camera, on a long lens from the doorway, zoomed in. It captured my hand, the scarred, working hand of a builder, against the fine linen. It captured the flame. It got its shot. The musicians in the loft, taking their cue, began to play. The guitarist started a simple, warm chord progression, and the violin answered with the high, sweet, lonely melody of an Appalachian carol. And as if on cue, the snow, which had been gentle, intensified. It was a true, high-country storm, a silent, swirling curtain of white against the black glass. The room was full. Cade and his team were plating the first course. I went to my seat, not at the head, but near the center, across from my grandmother. I tapped my water glass with a spoon. The laughter and chatter quieted. 18 faces turned to me. They were expectant, hopeful. I felt the weight of their attention. I had planned to say more, to talk about the house, about the light. But looking at them, at this collection of the displaced, at this community I had curated, the words felt cheap. I cleared my throat. I'm so glad you're here." My voice cracked. I stopped. "Thank you for coming. Please, eat." I sat. That was all. There was no need to mention the empty chairs in Ohio. The fullness of this table was the only statement that mattered. Cade, ever the professional, appeared with a silver tray. He hadn't brought champagne. He had brought 18 steaming ceramic mugs of his special cinnamon stick hot cocoa, each one piled high with fresh, snow-white whipped cream. We all raised our mugs. "To a warm night," Eli said, his voice surprisingly steady. "And to a solid table," Grandma May added, her sharp eyes finding mine. We drank. It was warm, sweet, and profoundly democratic. The dinner was alive. The sounds were of genuine connection. Leo, sitting right next to Grandma May, was explaining the structural instability of his Lego cantilever, and she was listening, asking him sharp questions about load distribution. After the white bean soup, Grandma May's recipe was a certified hit. My grandmother, warmed by the food, the cocoa, and the proximity of the fireplace, leaned back in her chair. She looked at the 2 kids, then at the table. laden with Cade's roasted chicken. "This is a feast," she said, her voice carrying in a sudden lull. "A real feast. You know, I remember a Christmas. Oh, must have been 1944. Back in Ohio. My daddy was gone. My brother was overseas. And my mother, she had no sugar, not a single grain. We were poor as dirt, and there was a war on. She had nothing, nothing for us kids." The table was silent, listening. "So," she continued, "my mother, she didn't cry. She went to the pantry. She had flour, and she had salt, and she had a little bit of lard, and she baked. She rolled out that dough and cut a whole tray of Christmas tree-shaped biscuits. No sugar. She frosted them with a little water so they'd look shiny." She chuckled. A dry, papery sound. "We sat at the table, the three of us, and we ate them. We called them wind-flavored cookies. You'd eat one, and you'd just keep on being hungry." A wave of laughter, warm and real, rolled across the table. Mrs. Alder reached out and patted May's hand. "Well, May," she said, "tonight, we're eating." From the deck, I saw the small, red light blinking remote camera. Ben was getting his shot. It panned slowly, smoothly, past the glass. It couldn't hear us. It didn't need to. It was capturing the image a long, single table, every seat full, a perfect, balanced composition of people lit by candlelight, their faces animated, their hands moving, no one in shadow, no one obscured, no one at the edge. Later, after the tart, after Cade and his team had been given a standing ovation, Mrs. Alder insisted, "A photograph. We must have a photograph of this." We pulled on our coats, grabbed the thick wool throws I'd stacked by the door, and filed out onto the wide, heated wooden deck. The snow was falling so thickly now, it muffled the entire world. The air was sharp and clean, so cold it stung. We huddled together, all 18 of us, a chaotic, laughing, bundled mass. I set my own professional camera on a tripod, hit the 10-second timer, and sprinted back, squeezing into the center, one arm around Grandma May, the other around Cousin Eli. The flash popped, momentarily blinding us, in the picture, which I would look at later. We are all laughing, our breath is pluming in the cold air, and the thousands of tiny fairy lights I had strung along the roofline were captured, out of focus, looking like a galaxy of stars that had fallen from the sky, getting tangled in our hair. The show aired in the dead, quiet week between Christmas and New Year's, that strange, formless void of a week where the world holds its breath, waiting for the calendar to turn. I was at the chalet, not alone. Grandma May had decided she was staying. "I've had enough of Ohio winters," she'd announced. "I'm staying until the thaw. Your couch is more comfortable than my bed." We were in the great room when it came on. It was 7 o'clock, mountain time. We had the fire going, the slate chimney radiating a deep, bone-penetrating warmth. I was on the floor, sketching a new joint detail on a roll of trace paper. May was in her designated armchair, wrapped in the wool robe, ostensibly reading a thick biography, but, I suspected, mostly sleeping. The show's theme music was slick and upbeat. Homestyle Channel presents Chalet Reborn. The drone shot I had seen on Ben's monitor filled the screen. The chalet, a geometric beacon of cedar and glass, set against the vast blue-white emptiness of the Elk Mountains. The narrator's voice was warm, confident, the kind that sells high-end real estate and impossible dreams. "We all dream of a perfect home," the voice cooed. But what is a home? Is it just a structure? Or is it a space that welcomes us? They cut to the shot of the great room, lit by the galaxy of fairy lights, the beeswax candles glowing. The camera panned, slow and reverent, across the 16-foot oak table. It was set for dinner. The menus were visible. The camera zoomed slightly, lingering on the words I had written at the bottom. "There is no kids' table. There is no edge seating." May's eyes snapped open. "Well, I'll be..." she murmured. The narrator's voice returned, layered over the high, sweet notes of the Appalachian violin. Architect Abigail Parker didn't just build a masterpiece of modern design, she built a new definition of home, because a home isn't just a house. The camera cut to the shot from the deck. Filming through the glass, it was the shot of the table, full, loud, and alive. Every seat was occupied. We were laughing. May was telling her wind-flavored cookies story. The camera couldn't hear us, but it captured the undeniable energy of connection. The narrator delivered the final line over the image. A home is a table long enough for everyone you love. The screen faded to black. Credits rolled. The chalet, by contrast, was utterly silent. I looked at May. She was looking at the dark screen. "Huh," she said. "They got it right." And then, my phone, charging on the kitchen's stone countertop, lit up. It was a text. The screen glowed. A small, angry rectangle in the quiet room. Before I could move, it lit up again, and again. Then, it began to vibrate, a furious, insistent buzzing against the stone. It didn't stop. It was a continuous, frantic vibration as a cascade of calls and messages poured in from a single time zone. 3 hours to the east. I walked over to it. The screen was a log of my family's panic. Mom, missed call, Mom, missed call, Dad. Text message, Savannah, missed call, Mom. I picked it up. I opened the first text from my mother. Judy. Abigail Parker. What have you done? The show just aired. The entire church group saw it. My phone is blowing up. You have embarrassed your father and me beyond belief. People are asking why you weren't here. They're asking why we didn't invite our own daughter. You made us look like monsters. I read the words. The focus, as always, was on the reflection. Not the act, but the appearance of the act. Her embarrassment, her phone, her reputation. I took a breath. I typed one. Simple sentence. I was not invited to a gathering. I was excluded from Christmas. I hit send. The delivered receipt appeared instantly. A new bubble popped up immediately. She had been waiting. Her fingers hovering. That is not true, and you know it. It was just a small gathering for the baby. You are twisting this. That television show, they edited it. They clearly edited it to make it look dramatic. They cut things together. You know how they are. It was the editing. Abigail. The gaslight was so bright. I felt I should shield my eyes. I said nothing. I exited the text thread. I went to my photo library. I scrolled back 3 weeks. There it was. The original message. The quiet, private Christmas. The just Savannah's family. I took a screenshot. I returned to her text thread. I attached the image. I sent it. I added no words, no explanation, just the black and white, unedited, undeniable evidence. The vibrating from the countertop stopped. For 1 full minute, there was silence. Then, the phone rang. The screen flashed, Mom. This time, it was not a text she could deflect. I answered. I put it on speaker. The sound of the open, empty line filled the room. Abigail. Her voice was tight, high, and shaking with a different kind of energy, not just anger, fear. Hi, Mom. What was that? What did you send me? What are you trying to imply? It's the text you sent me, I said, my voice flat. The one from 3 weeks ago. The one uninviting me. It was, she stammered. And then, a different voice. My father. Rick. He must have grabbed the phone from her. His voice was the one he used at the bank, the one meant to intimidate. Abigail, you stop this. Right now. This is ridiculous. You are embarrassing your mother. You know your sister. She's sensitive. She just had the baby. She needs the support. You've always been the strong one. You don't need this fuss. The old words, the old, broken, load-bearing wall of their neglect. You're strong. You don't need. I was about to respond. I was about to say, the fuss, Dad, was the point. But I didn't have to. From the armchair. Grandma May's voice cut through the room. It was not loud, but it was clear. "Rick?" The speaker went silent. I could picture him, on the other end, in his beige living room in Ohio, freezing. "May," he said, his voice instantly smaller. "Yes, it's May. I'm sitting here with Abigail. I watched the show, too, and I'm listening to you now." She stood up, a little stiffly, and walked over to the counter. She looked at the phone, as if it were a disobedient child. "I have been listening to you and Judy use that excuse for 30 years, she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the absolute weight of her 78 years. "I've listened to you call this girl strong and independent every time you wanted to avoid parenting her. You stop it. Stop using strong as a justification for being cold. Stop using independent as an excuse for being neglectful. A strong wall still needs a foundation. Rick, you and Judy never even bothered to pour the concrete." The silence on the other end was absolute. It was a vacuum. I could hear my father's faint, shallow breathing. Judy's voice, small and reedy, finally broke in. "May, you don't understand. The TV show. They edited. It was the angle." "I am not talking about the television," May said, her voice sharp, cutting through the static. "The television just held a mirror up to the house you built. I'm talking about the science fairs you missed. I'm talking about the laptop you bought for one girl while the other was using a broken piece of plastic. I'm talking about sending your daughter a bill for her own birthday dinner." The breath I was holding, I hadn't realized I was holding it. It left my body in a slow, pained rush. "The show is over. Judy," May said, her voice softening just a fraction. "And this performance, it's over, too." This was it, the moment I had never known I was waiting for. The internal camera, the one that had been filming our family's toxic, repeating drama for my entire life, had just been unplugged. This wasn't a show anymore. This was just the quiet, cold truth, sitting in the room. I reached out and took the phone. May's hand was trembling, but her eyes were steady. I took it off speaker. "Mom, Dad." My voice was my own. It wasn't angry. It wasn't shaking. It was just calm. "Grandma's right. The show is over. The door at my house is always open. But it's open for a real conversation, not for this one. I have to go." I pressed the red end icon. The silence that filled the chalet was different. It was not empty. It was solid. It was the sound of a foundation settling. I stood by the great glass wall, looking out at the snow, now blue in the deep twilight. I watched the flakes, each one a different, perfect, six-sided structure, falling, landing, and becoming part of the whole. May came and stood beside me. She didn't hug me. She just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the same view. "Justice, Abby," she said quietly, her breath fogging the cold glass. "It isn't a bolt of lightning from the sky. It's not a big clap of thunder." She put her hand on my shoulder. "It's just a steady table. And Lord, child, you built one." The days after the broadcast were quiet, but it was a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of exclusion. It was the charged, humming silence of an engine cooling down. Grandma May and I settled into a domestic rhythm. I worked on new blueprints at the great oak table, and she sat by the fire, claiming to be reading her biography, but I knew, watching me work. One morning, over coffee, she did not open her book. She simply watched me as I organized my invoices. "Abby," she said, her voice matter-of-fact, "I need you to get me a witness." I looked up from my laptop. "A witness for what?" "For this." She reached into the canvas tote bag she kept by her chair, a bag that usually held knitting needles and hard candies. She pulled out a long manila envelope. It was thick, worn at the edges, and held closed with a rubber band that had gone brittle. She slid it across the table. It was not a request. It was a transfer of information. "That," she said, "is my will. Or the draft of it. Had a lawyer in Columbus draw it up 2 years ago. Never signed it, never filed it. I was waiting. Turns out, I was waiting for you to build a table. I looked at the envelope. I did not want to touch it. This felt like a different kind of blueprint, one I had no business reading. Grandma, that's private. It's about to be public, if you'll just call a witness. But you should read it first. You're the executor. You need to know what's in the box before you agree to carry it. My hand, the one I'd used to sand the table, felt heavy as I picked it up. I slid my finger under the brittle rubber band, and it snapped. I pulled out the sheaf of papers. It was a standard, legally dense document, full of heretofore and testaments. I skipped to the operative clauses. My breath caught. She was leaving the bulk of her modest estate, her savings bonds, her small market stock portfolio to be divided equally. But then there were two, very specific, very large exceptions. First, the house, the original family house in Ohio, the one my mother had grown up in, the one I had grown up in, the one my parents still lived in, was not theirs. It was May's. She had held the deed all along, letting them live there, in her words. Like tenants who'd stopped paying rent on their gratitude, the deed to that house was to be transferred, solely and immediately, to me, Abigail Parker. Second, she had carved out a separate $50,000 fund. It was not a scholarship for college. It was the May Whitmore Vocational Trust. It was designed, in her precise, no-nonsense language, to provide grants for tools, certifications, and apprenticeships for any family member, distant or near, who has been told their work is too dirty for the dining room table. I looked up, my eyes stinging. "Why, Grandma?" "Because," she said, taking a sip of her coffee, her gaze fixed on the snow-covered mountains outside the glass. "You're the only one who understands the value of a seat, the one who knows a chair is something you build, not something you're given. You're the only one who understands that. So you should hold the keys to the house." She paused, and her gaze hardened. "And there's another reason." "I know," I said. "My parents." She nodded. "Your father, Rick, and your mother, they've been circling for 5 years, after your grandfather died. They started in on me about managing my assets, about how confusing it must all be. Last year, your father brought a lawyer to my kitchen, a smarmy man in a shiny suit. They brought a stack of papers. "A power of attorney," I said. It wasn't a question. "Full power of attorney," she confirmed, "so they could help me sell the Ohio house, help me move into a sensible facility, help me consolidate my funds." "What did you do?" "I asked the lawyer if he wanted sugar in his coffee. Then I told him to get the hell out of my house. And I told your father that if he ever brought that shiny-suited vulture around again, I'd bill him for the trespass. I never signed a thing." Her eyes narrowed. "But they were eager like men who hadn't checked the foundation before they started planning the second story. I'm telling you this, Abby, because I don't think they stopped trying just because I said no." A cold, precise anger settled in me. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of my youth. It was the cold, clean anger of an engineer finding a structural flaw. This was no longer just about emotional neglect. This was about tangible, financial, and legal overreach. "Grandma," I said, "I'm going to make a call." I walked to my office, the small alcove I'd built off the great room. I closed the door. I did not call my parents. I did not call Savannah. I called my attorneys, Holloway Pike, the Denver firm that had handled the incorporation of Northline Atelier. "David," I said, when my lawyer picked up, "I have a research project for you. It's a probate and property question, public record. I need to know if there have been any petitions filed in the state of Ohio, county of Franklin, regarding a woman named May Whitmore, specifically, any petitions for conservatorship, co-management of assets, or anything, filed by Rick or Judy Parker." "Got it," he said. "Give me 24 hours. He called back in 3. "Well," David said, his voice stripped of its usual legal warmth, "your grandmother is one sharp lady." "What did you find?" "I found a failed petition, filed 2 months ago, Rick and Judy Parker versus May Whitmore. They petitioned for a limited, emergency conservatorship. The stated reason was diminished financial capacity and susceptibility to undue influence. The petition was sloppy. They used their status as her daughter and son-in-law as the primary justification. The judge, thank God, was not an idiot. He saw it for the asset grab it was. He denied it with prejudice, which is lawyer speak for, "Don't you ever dare bring this garbage back into my courtroom." I gripped the phone. They did it. 2 months ago, after she told them no, they tried to have her declared incompetent. They tried, David said, and they failed. The public record is sealed, as is standard in denial. But the court docket is not. They filed. They lost. Your grandmother's assessment was 100% correct. She is legally, and by all appearances, factually, in complete control of her assets. I hung up. The words ringing in my ears, diminished financial capacity, undue influence. They were trying to paint her as the one being manipulated, while they were the ones trying to steal her house. At that exact moment, as if summoned by the sheer, toxic force of the universe, my phone lit up with a new notification. It was not a text. It was a direct message on a social media platform I rarely used. From Savannah. I opened it. The message was long. A single, unpunctuated block of text. I cannot believe you. I am sitting here in Ohio. My phone is buzzing. People from Mom's church are sending her sympathy links to that tacky TV show you did. And I cannot believe you would take a private family matter and turn it into a public spectacle like this. You have always been selfish. You have always had to be the center of attention. But this is a new low. You are airing our dirty laundry for strangers. You are turning this entire family into a show. I read the message. I read the part about dirty laundry. I read the part about selfish. And I read the part about a show. I thought about the court docket David had just found. I thought about their attempt to strip mine my grandmother's life. My fingers were steady on the screen. I typed a single, short reply. I am not turning anything into a show. Savannah, I am turning silence into a table. You should try it. The view is better. I hit send. I blocked her account. I walked back into the great room. May was looking at me, her eyes questioning. They filed a petition, I said, 2 months ago, to have you declared incompetent. She did not gasp. She did not cry. She just nodded. Once, slowly. So, she said, the termites are in the foundation. Good to know. Just then, Cade, the chef, stopped by. He was carrying a crate of winter vegetables, a thank you for the home-style shout-out, which he said had quadrupled his catering inquiries. He saw the mood in the room. He saw the legal papers on the table. Am I interrupting? He asked. You're an interruption I welcome, I said, rubbing my temples. Look, he said, shifting his weight. I'm not a family guy, but I know a good story, and I know a good space. That show, what you built, it's got people in this town talking. And I was thinking, I have the food, you have the space, and that grandma of yours, she has the story. What are you getting at? Cade? I'm proposing a charity supper, he said, his words gaining speed. Right here. A one-night-only event. We sell 20 tickets, top dollar. We give all the proceeds. Not to some big faceless charity. We give it to that. He pointed to the will on my table. The vocational fund. The Dirty Hands Fund. I looked at May. A slow, dangerous smile was spreading across her face. Cade, I said, I have one condition. If we do this, it's not a gesture. It's a business. Full transparency. We publish the books, every ticket sold, every dollar raised, every penny spent, no moral debt, no favors, just a clean public ledger. That's the only way I work, he said. What would we call this fund? I asked, looking at May. She looked at the stool in the photograph on my wall. She looked at the chair I had built for her. She looked at the great solid table. You call it May's Bench, she said. It's not just a seat at the table, it's a place to work, she smiled. It's a seat, and it's a bridge. Cade put the idea online an hour later, a simple, elegant graphic. The Halo Ridge Supper Building Maze Bench. 20 tickets, $500 apiece. They sold out in 24 hours. My phone buzzed again. It was not my family. It was the Aspen Daily News. Aspen was paying attention. The chalet, which had felt like a sanctuary, was now a public stage, but this time, the public had paid for their tickets. The night of the Maze Bench supper was different from the Christmas Eve dinner. The snow was heavier, a thick, insulating blanket that muffled all sound, making the world feel intimate and isolated. The warm, three-layered light from the chalet's great room spilled out onto the drifts, turning the patio into a pool of amber. The 20 guests were not the displaced. They were the established. They were Aspen's quiet power, the old money rancher, the tech philanthropist, the head of the local arts council. They arrived not in flashy cars, but in heavy-duty Suburbans, and they wore not fur, but practical, hand-woven wool scarves and thick, sensible boots. They were here because they, too, understood the value of a solid structure. Cade had transformed the great room. The long oak table was set, but this time it was surrounded by smaller, intimate groupings of chairs. At the front, near the slate fireplace, was a simple, professionally painted sign on a wooden easel, Maze Bench, a fund for the forgotten crafts. The Homestyle Channel crew was back. Ben Russo had called, almost sheepishly. "Abigail," he'd said, "the network is obsessed with your story." The ratings were a holiday miracle. They've greenlit a follow-up segment for our New Year's Giving Back special. The story is the fund. It's the community. Can we please come and shoot some quiet B-roll, no faces, no interviews, just the atmosphere? We'll make an additional $5,000 donation to the fund for access. I had agreed, and so they were here. 2 cameramen, confined to the perimeter, their lenses pointed at the fire, at Cade's artful plates of food, at the snow falling outside the glass. They were part of the scenery now, a quiet, recording eye. The dinner began. Cade's food was elevated, but still honest. The conversation was a low, powerful hum. These people were not here for a handout. They were here to invest. After the first course, I stood. The room quieted. The Homestyle camera's red light flicked on. I looked at the 20 faces, and at my grandmother, who was sitting in the center, watching me. Her eyes clear. I had practiced a speech. I threw it out. "I'm an architect," I began, my voice clear in the warm room. "I build things. For the longest time, I thought that meant building walls, to keep myself safe, to prove I was strong enough, to prove I didn't need anything." I looked at the table, at the wood I had sanded. But a structure is only as good as what it does. A wall can be a prison, or it can be the foundation for a home. A table can be a barrier, or it can be a bridge. This entire space was designed to be a bridge. I pointed to the sign. Maze Bench is for every person who was ever told their work was too dirty for the dining room. It's for the welder, the carpenter, the mechanic. It's for the hands that build, not just the hands that sign checks. Tonight, you are not just funding a charity, you are funding a foundation. I paused, and my voice dropped. This place is for anyone who was ever told to sit on the edge. Tonight, at this table, there is no edge. Thank you for being here. I raised my glass. To the center. To the center. The room echoed. There was a wave of warm, sincere applause. I sat. Cade, who was standing by the kitchen, gave me a sharp, respectful nod. Then, May, without being asked, tapped her water glass. She was not a public speaker, but she had a story. "Thank you, Abigail," she said, her voice dry, but caring. "She's a good builder. She gets that from me." A polite chuckle went through the room. She continued, "am not a philanthropist. I was a waitress for 43 years. I know hands. I know what hard work looks like. I also know what being overlooked looks like. She looked right at the Arts Council president. My granddaughter and we used to celebrate our birthdays in the corner of a kitchen. We'd share a slice of pie before the real party started, because we were told we were in the way. The room was utterly still. The cameras were motionless. And now, May said, her voice not changing, not rising, I am sitting in a house that she built, and she did not put me in the corner. She put me in the middle, with all of you. She raised her water glass. Don't give because it feels good. Give because it's solid. Give because it's time to build something right. Thank you for my bench. The applause this time was a different thing. It was an explosion. The tech philanthropist stood, then the rancher. In 30 seconds, the entire room was on its feet. Not for me, but for her, for May. As the main course was served, I was standing near the entryway when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I had silenced all notifications, except one, the one from the Parker family. I pulled it out, shielding the screen. It was my mother. We saw the article in the Aspen paper. It's all over the internet. The fund, the dinner. It looks lovely. Your father and we are so proud. I read the word proud, a word I had been trying to earn for 32 years. It tasted like ash. I waited. The 3 dots appeared. She was typing again. We were wondering. We are in Ohio. But can we come? Is it too late to come? My thumb hovered over the screen. This was the moment. The checkmate. I could say no. I could say, you're not invited. I could say, how dare you? I did none of those things. I was an architect. I dealt in coordinates. I pulled up the map on my phone. I dropped a pin on the exact location of the Halo Ridge Chalet. I copied the GPS coordinates. I copied the street address. I texted her back. I sent only the address. No yes, no welcome, no. Just the location, a set of instructions, a map. I put the phone away. At the same time, across town, a friend of Savannah's, a young woman I vaguely remembered from the high school cheerleading squad, had seen the same Aspen article. She took to social media. She posted a picture of her own, a perfect, filtered selfie, and added a caption. So inspired by people who turn their family time into a charity event. Some people just love making a show out of charity. So tacky. Glad my family is real. The post, set to public, was live for exactly 15 minutes. In that time, it was seen by the Aspen Arts Council president, by Cade's lead supplier, and by the wife of the tech philanthropist. The backlash was not a fire. It was an avalanche. It was a flood of quiet, cutting, high-altitude Aspen shade. Tacky the Mays Bench Fund, I'd call it essential. Tell me you don't understand philanthropy without telling me. The post was deleted. Savannah's social media account went silent. I, in the meantime, had made another call. To David, my lawyer. David, I'm at the fundraiser. I just want to be sure. Any new filings, anything from Ohio? Nothing on the docket, Abigail, he said. But the world is small. My colleague, the one who practices in Ohio. He had a very interesting lunch. He was at a bar with a junior lawyer from your father's old firm. The junior lawyer was complaining. Said his boss, Rick Parker, was on the warpath. Kept asking his firm's legal counsel if broadcast defamation was a thing. Kept asking about undue elder influence and contesting a will before it's filed. They're rattling sabers. Abigail, they're looking for a weapon. But they have no case. It's just noise. Thank you, David, I said. It's good to know the frequency of the noise. I hung up. I looked across the room. My father was on the phone to lawyers. My sister was silent. Her friends shamed. My mother was holding an address. And I was at the center of a room that was buzzing with positive, generative power. There was one last detail, one piece of staging I had reserved for this night. Against the far wall, near the hallway, I had placed a single chair. The same simple, shaker-style chair I had used on Christmas Eve. But tonight, it had a different sign on it. The sign was not carved. It was a simple, printed, elegant card, held in a small brass stand. It read, "Reserved." For anyone who truly wishes to apologize, it was the trap. It was the social leverage. It was not an accusation. It was an invitation. And in that room, in that moment, it was the most terrifying object I had ever built. The dinner concluded. Kate and I stood together. "Tonight," I announced, "we had a goal of $10,000. And," Cade said, his voice booming with pride, "because of your generosity, and because of a last-minute, very generous donation from the Homestyle channel, I am proud to announce that May's Bench has, as of 10 minutes ago, a starting fund of $25,700. The room erupted. It was a success. Clean, total, and publicly recorded. The cameras were off, but the memory was set. The guests began to leave, pulling on their wool scarves, shaking my hand, shaking May's hand. "Incredible work, Abigail. An honor, May." Soon, the chalet was quiet again. Just me, May, and the faint smell of beeswax and Cade's roasted duck. I was stacking plates. May joined me at the window, watching the last pair of red taillights disappear down the snowy, winding drive. The chair, the one with the brass sign, was still empty. It was a question mark, left hanging in the air. A piece of unfinished business, the high watermark of the tension. "They didn't come," I whispered, more to myself than to her. May didn't turn from the window. She just watched the snow. "Don't demand they sit, Abby," she said, her voice quiet. "That's their move, not yours." She paused, her breath fogging the glass. "You just let them find their way to the chair, the right way." The next day, it did not snow. The world was encased in a profound, brilliant, and blinding white. The sky was a high, thin, unforgiving blue. The silence of the mountain was absolute. At 11 in the morning, a rented, dark gray SUV, its tires caked with road salt and mud from the long drive, made its way slowly up the final, winding ascent to Halo Ridge. It parked, not quite pulling all the way into the spot, as if uncertain of its right to be there. For a full minute, no one got out. Then, the doors opened. My father, Rick, emerged first, his thin, Ohio banker's trench coat looking flimsy and inadequate against the vast, snowy landscape. My mother, Judy, followed, her hand immediately going to her hair, a gesture of social preparedness that was utterly useless here. Finally, Savannah. She was wearing expensive-looking ski wear, but she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. A gentle star, completely eclipsed by the sheer, indifferent white of the mountain. I watched them from the great room window. Grandma May was sitting in her chair by the fire, her back to the door. She did not need to see them arrive. She knew they were coming. I had sent the address. That was all. And they had come. I opened the door before they could knock. They stepped inside, one by one, from the blinding cold into the warm, quiet room. They brought the scent of the road with them, stale car air, coffee, and a faint, sharp tang of panic. My mother stopped first, her hand gripping the strap of her handbag. Her eyes went immediately to the table, the 16-foot, solid oak, immovable object that had, by its mere existence, dismantled her world. Her hand, the one gripping the strap, began to tremble. My father did not look at the table. He looked past it. He scanned the corners of the room. He looked up at the high, cedar-planked ceiling. He was looking for the cameras, for the crew, for Ben Russo, for the show. I saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes when he found nothing. The room was empty. The Homestyle crew was gone. The only sound was the low, steady hiss and crackle of the logs burning in the slate fireplace. I pressed a small, unmarked button on the wall panel by the door. It was a custom switch I had installed. It cut the power to every in-wall, hardwired microphone and security camera I had placed for the chalet's insurance. A single, green indicator light on the panel went dark. "There's no show, Dad," I said, my voice quiet. but it filled the entire, high-ceilinged space. The cameras are off. It's just us. Just a conversation. He finally looked at me. His authority, the thing he wore like his bank manager suit, was gone. He was just a man, in a cold house, far from home. My mother spoke first, her voice thin, aiming for a tone of wounded, gentle confusion. She looked at the table, at the chair May was sitting in, at the fire. Abigail, this place, it's just so much. She was trying to find her footing. She was reaching for the old script. I just... She looked at me, her eyes pleading for me to give her the old excuse. I always thought you were so strong. I thought you didn't need all this attention. There it was, the strong one defense, the justification for a lifetime of neglect. I did not raise my voice. I did not get angry. I was an architect. I was just pointing to the failed component. That wasn't a thought. Mom, I said, my voice as calm and clear as the mountain air outside. That was a convenience. It was the story you told yourself so you could rationalize not seeing me. It was the excuse that let you off the hook. Her face went pale. It was the first time, perhaps in her entire life, that one of her emotional maneuvers had failed to find purchase. My father stepped forward, his own script ready. He was the protector, the public-facing man. Now, Abigail, he started, his voice a low rumble. You have to understand, your mother and I, we have a position in the community. I have a reputation. I have to maintain appearances out there. People talk. I know they do, I said, and you have to maintain appearances, but you made a choice. You sold the truth of this family to buy your appearances. You let Mom tell people you had a perfect family. And in order to keep that lie, I had to be erased. My mess had to be hidden. You traded your daughter for your reputation. That is an unfair, he stammered, but his words had no foundation. I am just... Savannah spoke for the first time. Her voice was small, a whisper. She was standing behind both of them, as she always had. I don't understand. Abby, you were always so distant. You were the one who went to Denver. You were the one who was always in the garage. I thought you chose to be separate. The accusation, the final, desperate pivot, that it was my fault, that my distance was the cause of their neglect, and not the result of it. I looked at her. My gentle star of a sister. I didn't answer her. Instead, I walked past them. I walked to the hallway, to the single, framed photograph I had hung on the wall, the old Polaroid. I unhooked it. I walked back and held it out. I didn't hold it out to her. I held it out for all of them to see. It was the picture of me, 10 years old, sawdust in my hair, grease on my face, grinning, and in my lap, a small, lopsided, single-person cupcake. And in that cupcake, a single, crooked, half-melted birthday candle. The birthday celebration I'd had by myself in the corner of the kitchen, before my mother had shooed me out so she could set up for Savannah's real party. Does that look like a choice to you? I asked. Savannah looked at the photo, and for the first time, her polished, protected face crumpled. She recognized the cupcake. She recognized the kitchen corner. She knew, in that instant, that the photograph was the truth. They were all silent. There were no more scripts. No more excuses. There was just the cold, hard, documented evidence, and then, from the fireplace, a sound, the scrape of wood on stone. Grandma May stood up. She had not turned around this whole time. She turned now. She looked at her daughter, Judy, at her son-in-law, Rick, at her other granddaughter, Savannah. She looked at the three of them, standing there, exposed, in the middle of the room. Her voice was not angry. It was quiet. It was the voice of a 78-year-old woman who had seen it all and was, quite frankly, tired. You know, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. You all keep talking about appearances, about what the TV showed, what the church group thinks." She looked at her daughter. "Judy, you've been grabbing at your reputation like a drowning woman, but you're missing the point." She took a step toward them, and they all flinched, just slightly. "Fairness," May said, her voice dropping, "isn't the thing we suddenly grab for when we get exposed. It's not the thing we perform when the cameras are on." Her gaze was like a level, testing their integrity. Fairness, justice, love, whatever you want to call it, it's the thing you're supposed to be doing when no one is looking. The silence that followed that statement was absolute. It was vast. It was the silence of the snow-covered mountains, the silence of the empty, camera-less room, the silence of three people who had finally run out of words. No one cried, no one screamed or stormed out. They just stood there, broken. In the house that I had built, they had come here, to this chalet, perhaps expecting a fight, expecting a negotiation, expecting a show. But this was not a show. It was a structural analysis, and the final report was in. The foundation of their world was, and always had been, built on lies. And the truth, which was my life, my work, and my house, was the one thing their structure could not withstand. They had to accept it. The apology, if one was ever to come, could not be spoken. It would have to be built. And they, I realized, didn't even own a hammer. It was Christmas Eve. It was not the Christmas Eve of the Homestyle channel. It was not the Christmas Eve of the fundraiser. This was a night that belonged only to the house. The snow, which had been falling for 2 days, had now become a quiet, vertical ocean, a dense, unending curtain of white that sealed the chalet from the rest of the world. The light from the great room's windows, the 3-layered, honey-colored warmth, did not penetrate the storm, but was reflected back on itself, turning the room into a self-contained, glowing universe. We were at the table, the 16-foot, solid oak table. My guests were not the displaced, and not the donors. They were the ones who had driven. My father, my mother, and my sister were seated on one side. They had not left. After the confrontation, after the silence, they had, with no other options, accepted my quiet, flat invitation. "Dinner is at 7. Grandma May sat at her center seat, opposite the fire. I sat next to her, and in the middle of the long, linen-clad runner, at the precise visual center of the room, was the chair. The simple, shaker-style chair. The one that had been reserved for an apology. The sign was gone. The chair itself was the only statement, and it was empty. It was not a head of the table, because my table had no head. It was, instead, the point of balance, and it was vacant, a void in the very center of our gathering. The musicians from the first dinner, the violinist and the guitarist, were here. I had hired them again. They were playing something soft. Bach, maybe. Music that was structured, mathematical, and left no room for messy emotions. Cade was in the kitchen, and the smell of roasted root vegetables and a deep, rich beef stew filled the air. This was food designed to anchor, not to impress. We ate the first course in near total silence. The only sounds the click of silver on ceramic and the low, steady thrum of the wind against the 2-story glass. The tension was a physical thing. A fifth guest. My father cleared his throat. The roads are going to be bad." "They're fine," I said. "The drive is heated." Silence returned. This was the pivot point. The pre-climax was over. The confrontation had happened. This was the moment where the new structure was either going to be accepted or the old one would collapse entirely. I stood. Everyone flinched. My mother's hand, which had been twisting a linen napkin in her lap, went still. "Before Cade brings the main course," I said, my voice steady, "I have a few announcements. Business, really. Since I seem to finally have the entire board of directors in one room." My father's eyes narrowed. "Abigail, this is not the time for—" "It is, in fact, the only time," I said. I looked at May. Grandma, I had my lawyer, David Pike, meet me in Aspen this morning. We had some documents to finalize. I walked to my office alcove and retrieved a single, thick, 9 by 12-inch manila envelope. It was sealed. It was heavy. I did not give it to May. She had already given me her instructions. I placed it on the table, in the center, next to the empty chair. This, I said, is my grandmother's last will and testament. It was signed, notarized, and filed with the state of Colorado by proxy this morning at 10 o'clock. It is a legal, binding, and ironclad document. My mother's breath hitched. Savannah stared at the envelope. I am the executor, I continued, and Grandma May has insisted that its primary provisions be read aloud, here, at this table, in the presence of all beneficiaries. I opened the envelope. I pulled out the document. May Whitmore, being of sound mind, I read, does hereby declare, first, the fund, May's Bench, is to be the primary recipient of the liquid assets, to be managed by a board. The board will consist of myself, as executor, and Cade, as community partner. I looked at my parents. Second, the property, the house, in Ohio. My mother's hand gripped my father's arm. The house and the land it sits on, I read, will not be left to Judy or Rick Parker. It will not be left to Savannah Parker. It will not, in fact, be left to me. The confusion was total. My father looked, for the first time, genuinely lost. The deed, upon May's death, will be transferred to the May's Bench Fund. The house will no longer be a private residence. It will become a community house, a place for the fund's work. A home for apprentices, a workshop, a place for people who need a place to work. The keys will be managed, in perpetuity, by the board of the fund. My mother made a small, strangled sound. The house she had grown up in, the house she had lived in, rent-free, for 30 years, the house she had tried to leverage, to steal, was gone. It had been, in one clean, legal move, given to the very people she had spent her life ignoring. That's theft, my father whispered, his bank manager brain finally processing the numbers. She can't, May. You can't. May looked at him, her eyes clear. It was never your house, Rick, she said, her voice simple. It was always mine, and I've decided I want to give it to people who will fix the foundation, not just live in the attic. And us, my mother whispered. What about us? We live there. This brings me, I said, to the second item. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small velvet bag. I opened it and dumped the contents onto the oak table. It was a single, newly cut, brass key, a key to the Ohio house. I slid it across the table. It stopped, spinning slightly, in front of my father. That is a copy, I said. As executor of the fund, I am authorized to grant one. The board has agreed. You can stay in the house. You can live there for the rest of your lives. But you are no longer the owners. You are guests. You are guests, with the same status as any apprentice, any carpenter, any dirty hands kid who comes to learn. You have one key. You have no privilege. You have no authority. You have a seat, the same as everyone else. My father stared at the key. A single, small, brass object. It was his entire reputation, his community standing, reduced to a guest pass. And, I said, there is one last thing. I reached under the great oak table. There was a sound of wood dragging on stone. I pulled out an object. It was a stool. It was the stool. The one from the Polaroid, the crooked, misshapen thing I had built when I was 10, but it was changed. I had spent the last 2 days in my workshop. I had taken the old, splintered 2x4s. I had sanded them down, exposing the clean, pale wood beneath. I had respected the crooked cuts, the bad angles, But I had reinforced the joints. I had planed the seat. I had stained it the same, rich, warm color as the great table, and I had added new legs, longer, stronger, turning it from a child's stool into a full-height adult bar stool. It was still crooked, it was still scarred, but it was solid. I placed it next to the table. "You were right, Savannah," I said, my voice soft. I was distant. I was in the garage. I was sitting at the edge. I ran my hand over the newly stained wood. This was the chair I was told to sit in. The kids' table chair. The in the corner of the kitchen chair. I looked at my sister, at my mother, at my father. "It turns out," I said, "it just needed to be refinished. It's now strong enough, and tall enough, for anyone who dares to grow up." I stepped back. The room was a vacuum. The table was set. The will, the key, the stool. The 3 acts of restructuring were complete. All that was left was the human response. My mother, Judy, was staring at the stool. Her face was white. She was looking at the crooked legs, the scarred but smooth surface. She was looking at a 30-year history of her own failure. Right there, represented in wood. She stood up. Her movement was slow, unsteady. The violin music had stopped. The house was silent. She did not look at the stool. She looked at the table, the long, imposing, 16-foot barrier. She looked at her mother, May, who was watching her with an expression of profound, exhausted sadness. And then, she looked at the empty chair, the one in the center, the apology chair. She did not perform. She did not cry. There were no cameras. There was no audience. There was just the table and the chair. She began to walk. She walked from her seat, on the edge. She walked around the end of the table. She walked to the center. She stood in front of the empty chair. She turned. She looked at me. Her voice was a whisper, a sound so small I barely caught it. It was not a performance. It was a confession. "Abigail," she whispered, her hands shaking, her eyes finally, making contact. I don't know how. I want to learn. I want to learn how to sit in the right place." She pulled the chair out, and she sat, in the center, in the chair of apology. My father, Rick, said nothing. He watched his wife. He watched her sit. He looked at the key. He looked at the will. He looked at the stool. His entire world, his entire structure of reputation and appearances, was gone. He stood up. He walked. Not to my mother, but to the chair she had just sat in. He stood behind her. He did not touch her. He just placed his hand, his left hand. He placed it, palm down, on the carved wooden back of the chair she was sitting in. It was the first time in my life he had ever touched a structure I had built. It was not an apology. It was an acknowledgement, a tactile, undeniable admission. He was, finally, touching the foundation. And Savannah, she had been watching it all, her face pale. She watched her mother sit. She watched her father stand. She looked at the table, at the center of the table. I had placed a simple runner. She reached up to her neck. She was wearing the pearls, the ones from the birthday brunch, the symbol of her privilege. She fumbled with the clasp. She took the pearl necklace off. She did not hand it to me. She did not throw it. She leaned forward, and she placed it, gently, on the linen runner, in the middle of the oak table, a small, white, perfect circle. I don't want it," she whispered. I want it to belong to the table, not to the privilege." The room was still. The snow fell. The violinist, in the loft, slowly raised his bow. He didn't play a melody. He just drew a single, long, low, warm chord, a C major, the sound of resolution. It hung in the air, a note of pure, simple, structural integrity. Grandma May, from her seat, reached for her cup. The cocoa Cade had sent out. She raised it, not to me, Not to them, but to the table itself. "Tonight," she said, her voice clear and strong, "we are not proving who was right, and we are not proving who was wrong." Her eyes met mine, then my mother's, then my father's. "We are just, finally, sitting correctly." I looked at the table, my hand, the builder's hand, came to rest on the wood. I felt the grain, the beautiful scars I had left, the surface I had sanded. It was warm from the fire. I looked at the reflection in the great glass wall. The snow was a white veil, and behind it, I saw the ghost of the room. I saw a table with no head. I saw a family, fractured and broken and just beginning. I saw a group of people who had, at last, chosen to sit down. I nodded. Once. "Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below. Let's connect and share our thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button. It helps get these stories out to more people who need to hear them.